Yes. All right. Thank you for being here. I'm kind of happy there are not too many people because this is a provocative and bold new idea. And so hopefully you're the lucky few who can maybe handle this. I want to begin by thanking the FWB team for bringing me on as a narrative curator this year. I had a great time working with everyone on this great theme. I want to thank a few people who helped me come up with this idea, though they may not know it. Legacy Russell and her book Black Meme was a big inspiration here. Aria Dean and Notes on Black Celebration was a big inspiration here. Professor Jeffrey Sconce as well. My name is Justice Thelot. I'm a cyberethnographer, and this is Darkness After the Apocalypse. Act 1. Precedents. Guglielmo Marconi was born on April 25th, 1874 in Bologna, the son of Giuseppe Marconi, an aristocratic landowner, and Annie Jameson, granddaughter of John Jameson, founder of the eponymous whiskey brand. Marconi did not go to school. His parents hired tutors to teach him chemistry, mathematics, and physics. From a very young age, Marconi was interested in wireless telegraphy. In other words, the transmission of telegraphic messages without wires used by the telegraphs at the time. At 20, he started conducting experiments with radio waves, building most of the equipment in his attic. It would take almost 7 years, but on December 12, 1901, Marconi did the unthinkable. He transmitted, using a large antenna, the faint clicks of Morse code across the Atlantic Ocean. The letter S, it was. Marconi's breakthrough relied on the existing research and innovation from James Clerk Maxwell, Hertz, or Augusto Righi. It was a mishmash and potpourri of a bunch of new technology that he brought together. But it also relied on paths traced 250 years earlier. I first learned about Marconi in grade school as the inventor of the radio. He was brought to my attention again while reading Jeffrey Sconce's book, Haunted Media. Sconce describes how, with the advent of wireless telegraphy, a new cult named spiritualism formed around the technology with the belief that the invisible transmission could access the spirit realm and you could speak to the dead and the departed. Though most of the claims of spiritualism were debunked at the time by the scientists and investigative journalists, I have a suspicion that some of these were correct. What if the waves were truly haunted? Every route is pre-traced, every end predestined. What else was transatlantic? The word transatlantic kept reverberating in my mind as I put the book down, as I kept on reading Marconi's journals. I looked at the map of the world and I started to see the traces left by the waves. And I imagined what else or who else could have taken similar routes? What else was transatlantic? In 1525, the first slave ship made its way across the same waters of the Atlantic, carrying it with it objects, stories, and more importantly, bodies. The Middle Passage transmitted the ever-reverberating waves of blackness across the Atlantic to the new continent. The Middle Passage was horrific. The airways between the coasts were paved by the violence of displacements. In other words, they were haunted. Africa sent slaves to America, America sent sugar and other resources to Europe, so on and so forth. The mercantile triangular trade, which relied mostly on African slaves, was the precursor to modern capitalism. It allowed the enrichment of European nations and the formation of a new economic ideology. The very first modern corporation, the Dutch East India Company, was created specifically to lead the colonial ventures of the Netherlands. Upon establishing itself upon the Cape of Good Hope, what is known now as South Africa, the Dutch ambassador and administrator, Jan van Riebeeck, concluded within 2 months that slave labor would be needed for the hardest and dirtiest work. They took men from the kingdom of Dahomey, the island of Mauritius, and the indigenous Khoikhoi population. On the eastern shores of the African continent, a similar realization occurred. Ships carried with them a crucial new input for the colony of America, labor. As theorist Frank Wilderson wrote, Atlantic capitalism was kick-started by the rape of the African continent. Robot. 1920s, Czech, robota means force, labor. The idea of the robot comes from the idea of the slave. This very thing we are building now as we build agents, as Tesla builds Optimus, as we build different kinds of humanoid robots, is inherited from its etymology from a dream of infinite non-human labor, of total servitude, of a non-human entity working with no freedom, with no will. A slave, simple raw inputs of labor. This vision of the future depends on slavery. In providing a form of non-human labor, the Negro enabled American capitalism. Embodying the total worker, fully survive the agent, the robot, the slave. This is a painting by Turner called The Slave Ship from 1840. It tells the story of more than 130 enslaved Africans who were killed by British crew members who were carrying them across the Atlantic on a slave ship called Zong. Slavery begot capitalism. You get this sense that most African Americans owe nothing to the status of the human, Kodo Eshun. The airways used by wireless telegraphy are haunted by slave ships. The origins of the corporation, thereby capitalism, is haunted by the slave trade. The Negro precedes and engenders modern technology and modern capitalism. The Negro precedes and engenders modern technology and modern capitalism. Act 2, convergence. Techno-capital. Technology and capital, once distinct, are merging into a singular accelerating force that is quickly escaping human control. When technology and capital come together, they form techno-capital. From Moore's law to the rapidity of AI progress, things move fast. Accelerationism is a set of ideas across the political spectrum with a fundamental belief that technology and its change is rapidly intensifying beyond our understanding, comprehension, or control. To the accelerationist, the only solution is to further this acceleration past capitalism's breaking point. The only way out, as they say, is through. One must exploit the implicit paradox at the heart of capitalism to usher in a new age, a new utopia. Some believe that that through will lead to a transhumanist utopia, wherein man merges with machines. Some believe that that through will lead to a post-humanist utopia, wherein humanity is left behind and humans escape what William Gibson, the sci-fi writer, calls our meat or bodies. By uploading one's consciousness in some kind of computer or cloud. Either way, the machines, the avatars of techno-capital, become the new stewards of this world. That utopia, to me, is an apocalypse. British accelerationist thinker Nick Land believes techno-capital to be an unstoppable force which will surpass humanity and leave it behind. A necessary passage. Techno-capital will soon no longer require human input to exist. As we build out fully automated high-frequency trading, agentic frameworks deployed on the web, humanoid robots packing boxes, one can start to see how humans are left behind, how they are no longer required. The flow of capital can exist and persist even without mankind. As Land famously says, nothing human makes it out of the near future. Nothing human makes out of the near future. This merger between technology and capital builds upon a foundation laid by labor that was never recognized as human, the Negro. The system's speed and scale depends on prior dehumanization. As authors Harrison Fluss and Landon Frim note in their book Prometheus and Gaia, We must recognize the historical exclusion of black people from white humanist discourses, and the historical process whereby capitalism has engendered the black non-subject. Whether through phrenology, the study of head shapes, race science, or whatever else, the Negro has always been excluded from humanity. As we accelerate, we approach a post-humanist world. Hyperobjects. Techno-capital builds hyperobjects, intricate entities whose complexities and immensities cause them to evade human understanding. Its tentacles reach deep within our lives, and yet we can only see parts of the network. Always the trees, never the forest. In its expanse, the hyperobject resumes the numinous experience of the sublime, like the caveman in front of the monolith, like the landlocked peasant in front of the oceanic endlessness. Systems like neural networks exemplify this merger, backpropagations happening faster than human cognition can grok, with labor abstracted into pure data flows. We stare at the hyperobject with sublime resignation. Standing in front of hyperobjects, the role of humans is dwindling. From algorithmic decision-making to AI-governed markets, we are already witnessing the gradual disempowerment of the human as a meaningful agent or input of techno-capital. The hyperobject speaks the truth about the future, that it is self-sustaining, that it can exist without humans. It does not need humans. Nothing human makes it out of the near future. You can already see it now, you can picture it. A whole world where things go on, but humans don't. Nothing human makes it out of the near future. Extinction is not the end of techno-capital, just of humanity. If the system survives without humanity, who or what survives within or after it? Act 3, defiance. If nothing human survives, then perhaps what was never human survives. Maybe some of you see where I'm going with this. One thing survives the great accelerationist apocalypse. One thing survives the extinction caused by techno-capital. The Negro survives. The Negro is the final object, the last unincorporated node in the apocalypse of techno-capital. Illegible, opaque, excluded, marginal. The very things that are devalued are not assimilated and thus persist. Sometimes to be invisible is to be protected. All that will remain is blackness after the apocalypse. All that will remain is darkness after the apocalypse. So, no questions probably, right? Thank you so much for going on this ride with me. I think we have some time probably for some questions. I think there's a mic here.
That was outstanding, as usual.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely starting to really feel the push towards the either or, the no humans left in the near future, or the transhumanism thing. Do you think that the non-human will be more transhumanist, or completely part of the some sort of escape?
When I think about both the trans and post-humanist dreams or utopias or eschatologies, I think what comes to mind is sort of this profound hatred of the body. There is this sense in which all we should do is, shuffle off our mortal coils and find a way to sort of emancipate ourselves from the fallibility of the body. And that seems like a fool's errand to me, because to me, consciousness is not separate from the body. It is a phenomenon of our entire existence. It's holistic. Part of the folly, I think, of a lot of technologists is almost this like Platonic dualism, where we think that mind and body are separate, when, as Nietzsche tells us in Zarathustra, they're one, and it's foolish to think that they're separate. And so this idea of the consciousness being either sort of uploaded into something else implies that there is something outside of sort of our whole holistic experience. So I don't even know if these dreams are correct or true, is I guess my point.
Hello, friend.
Hi, Reggie.
So I think one sort of interesting through line of your thoughts is sort of maintaining the sort of scars of the transatlantic trade on blackness. But if we zoom forward sort of a little bit, right, to use some Christian history in America, Christianity was both used in the South to negate the Negro as having a soul, and then through the abolitionists as sort of the mechanism for equality. Mm-hmm. So then to fast forward to your point on robot, it feels like you're sort of allowing the continued subjugation for the sake of the roboticization in a way. And I wonder if, while I love the conclusion, I wonder if that continued sort of placement of the Black identity to continue in sort of like the darkness isn't fully accurate, especially with like contemporary culture.
Yeah, I think that's correct from a very like quotidian, like day-to-day understanding. There are many ways in which we as Black folks are like emancipated from some of this. I think what's interesting to me is specifically reading Land, Schreneck, Williams, the accelerationists, and they're trying to break out of this sort of, they're either going left or right, and they're trying to break out of capitalism with no regard and no sort of mention of the thing that enabled it to exist. And this is, shout out to her, Arya Dean writes beautifully about this in her essay, Notes on Black Acceleration. And I think parts of this is trying to figure out what does that look like when we take into consideration the precedent, the thing that engenders our systems, and kind of spin it on its head and say, well, actually, the maker, the thing that was sort of subjugated, then becomes the thing that survives. I think survival is a great thing, so it feels like a victory to me in that sense. Yeah. It's not exactly an answer to your question, but I
see exactly like the thread you're pulling on. I guess then, this is good because I'm working on an essay of like the accelerationism's love for non-humanism. Yeah. And which we also see like Peter Thiel in that recent New York Times thing, and they're like, oh, do you believe humans should continue on? And he's like, oh, well, when you think about it.
That answer was literally because he was probably read Land. Like, I think he, with whatever's in his library, I'm sure some of these acceleration thinkers are in there, because that is the exact answer they would give. Like, it doesn't need to continue because the world can continue without humanity.
Right. I guess, so then the question becomes, let's say we want to have a furthering of the human future. Is the only answer like a Dune-style Butlerian jihad, or is there something else?
If you believe the accelerationists, and this great book called The Accelerationist Reader sort of traces a lot of this thought even before, even like to Marx, where there is this like paradox within our system that potentially could lead to its downfall. So the further we go into it, the further we accelerate, the ineluctable conclusion is this sort of breakage point. Now, you could be, I suppose, like super techno-optimist and say that, no, the system is self-healing. And so we don't need to be accelerationists. We could be sort of techno-optimists and say, actually, we will figure out ways to get out of our sort of quagmires and whatnot. And I think that would be like the more, techno-optimist perspective on these things. We can continue going as we are, and we will find solutions as we advance. Yeah.
Hi. I
Hey,
really
Rusha.
wish I got the beginning of your talk, but
Oh, it makes no sense with just the end, probably.
well, the end completely sparked already so much in me, so I hope to get to talk to you more. But I just really appreciate bringing forward the darkness. It really is the creative void, and it is the birthplace of the new, of life. And when I think about the Negro, of Africa, of the origin, of creation, it is the birth. And it makes me think, and I love what you just brought up about, well, is the only route of resistance jihad? Is it this Dune-esque experience? And I like to think that perhaps it is creativity, and it is these essential human qualities that I think are especially celebrated and exploited and appropriated in the world, that are often the source of Black creation. I really think that this is such a time where, rather than thinking of the apocalypse, we have to remember our humanity and celebrate the places, spaces, and people that center that in the quotidian. So I'm curious for you, rather than just situating after the apocalypse, maybe I'm way less familiar with this work, this body of work. Like, are there themes around examining creativity as like a core piece of survival?
Two things come to mind. First is this idea that, apocalypse is in a way like a revelation, the book of Revelation, and there is a potential to see this sort of event as generative, to use that word. In a sense, when you think about the accelerationist eschatology, or like their vision of the apocalypse, it is one where there is this sort of grand demise, but something after it happens. When I think about creativity, I think about how it feels like one of the last battlegrounds right now as to what perhaps separates us or makes us unique as human beings. But there's very much a war, I think, on creativity right now. It is becoming harder and harder, I think, to define our unique quality as humans outside of faith, I think. And creativity is one of these last bastions, I think, that enables us to, I think, feel truly human. So in a world where we are, verging towards trans or post-humanism, that may be a defense, right? Unless you believe that these things are being taken over slowly but surely by these new technologies.
Hey, I'll pass it over there in just a moment. I'm really glad Brusha mentioned creativity, and it really got me thinking, because we share an Indigenous background, thinking about the original stewards of the earth and original, creators of human beings, obviously being origins in Africa. I wonder, it brought me to this thought to me, that I wonder maybe if you can sort of envision or hypothesize a future where there becomes a relationship between the technology that it persists after the quote-unquote apocalypse, that has a more sort of symbiotic relationship with the people that survive, and being the original stewards of this earth and understanding the original instructions to take care of this earth. Is there some sort of future or some sort of research that you have around this technology maybe adapting more stewardship and relationship with the earth after this quote-unquote apocalypse?
In one of his papers, Alan Turing writes, "Machines frequently surprise me." I really like this sentence, because when I think a lot about a lot of the conversations around AI doom and around sort of very apocalyptic scenarios that could happen with AI, they come from a perspective that superintelligence is always rational. And of course, that is heavily biased on the fact that human intelligence is seen as rationality. Now, what I would like to posit or hypothesize is that a true superintelligence would perhaps look more like dolphins or fungi or something completely outside of the realm of understanding of what our very narrow Cartesian understanding of rationality. So I wouldn't be surprised if an alien superintelligence comes in and they don't behave rationally. They behave in ways that are perhaps ancestral, traditional, or just completely different, fungal or mycelium or dolphins or orcas or anything that we don't really comprehend. Because it's a bit of a folly to think that our intelligence is like the end-all, be-all of this, especially if you do believe it's going to be 1,000 times more intelligent than us. And I think, in the words of Turing, machines will keep on surprising us. So if I had to take a positive spin on this, is that machines becoming the stewards of this world perhaps would be a positive thing. But, that's another question. I think, we have time for more questions? Are we good?
I have one.
One more? Yeah.
Hi, Ruby. Thank you for your capacity and your work. I guess you kind of somewhat answered it a little bit. I might piggyback a little bit. But what are your thoughts on what does agency look like in the darkness, for the darkness specifically? I think as we look through certain scenarios of, the transatlantic path, will we land upon yet again another passive sort of reality where I'm seeing some parallels between the agency of these folks and what does it then look like? Is it a passive path where the same thing sort of repeats itself with the same ecosystem change and it just sort of orients itself similarly, or what awareness do you think agents will have post-apocalypse, if that makes sense? Is that even relevant? Does it come to mind?
I don't know, honestly. And I mean, a lot of this, I don't know. I don't know what agency will look like. Of course, there's this feeling of servitude, I think, that comes from part of the talk and part of the essay. But at the same time, reading a book like The Gift by Arujo, there's a lot of agency even in those conditions. I skim over it, but the stories and a lot of things are very intentional as a part of that process, outside of what is actually happening. Actually, Zong is a revolt on the slave ship, so there's still a lot of agency happening within sort of the cultural or political context of this. Myself being Haitian, maybe agency looks like 1804 and sort of a slave revolt, but I think it's a hard question because I think it depends on the conditions in which the folks, I think, end up being.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.